In part 1 of this rebuttal to Lore Reloaded, I discussed that I believe that Lore underestimated the adaptability of the Borg when he stated that in a hypothetical war between the Borg and the Dominion, that the Dominion would win. In this part, I'm going to address the number one response from both Lore and many others who think that the Dominion would win, namely the idea that if facing down with the Collective, the Dominion would begin to employ suicide tactics to take down the Borg attackers. The cubes would be unable to adapt to the battering ram attacks and fall to the Dominion as cube after cube is destroyed against an attack from which you could not defend. Dominion kamikazes. Okay, so we really kind of need to crunch some numbers in order to figure this one out. I'm going to attempt to keep this as simple as possible. There are two main factors that Lore is not taking into account, and I'm going to deal with the more complicated but actually more damaging to his argument first, and that is the idea that a ship at high warp slamming into a cube would completely disintegrate it. There's only one problem with this idea, and it's basically that it's literally impossible to ram another ship while at warp. Keep in mind that warp drive from Star Trek is in fact a real concept, and there are real physics to base it on. In the simplest of terms, warp drive derives its name from the idea of bending or warping space around the ship, so that your ship is not actually traveling through space, rather outside of it. By bending space around an object, the object can move what appears to be faster than light. In Trek terms, we refer to this outside of space as subspace, which is why communications can travel faster than light in Trek. All communications chatter, as well as all faster than light travel, take place in subspace. So why is this a problem? Well, simply put, subspace is not space. Thus, you cannot ram something in space while you are in subspace, and vice versa. It would be like a submarine that's at a depth of 100 feet trying to ram a destroyer. The submarine would have to surface in order to impact the destroyer. Likewise, a starship traveling at warp would need to drop out of warp before it could ram the cube. And dropping out of warp just before impact would completely negate any benefits of traveling at super high velocity. If you look at how ships dropping out of warp appears in various visual effects shots, the ships appear to be going from light speed to almost a dead stop, and vice versa, from almost a dead stop instantly to light speed, and yet the crew inside the ship is not splattered against the walls. Now, I know some people will scream inertial dampeners, but those are really to compensate for maneuvering at sublight, not dropping out of warp. But this is because the warp engines do not accelerate the speed of the ship, only warping space around the ship, allowing it to move outside of space. So this means that the ship is not accelerating or decelerating in any real sense at all. It's simply bending the universe around it. So any and all ramming maneuvers would need to be using a conventional sublight engine. And based on what we've seen thus far in Trek, no race, not the Federation, the Dominion, nor even the Borg, has sublight engines even coming remotely close to the speed of light. And in fact, while the Dominion has technology far superior to the Federation as far as weapons and sensors, when it comes to engines, the Dominion falls quite short. If sublight travel was anywhere near the speed of light, then time dilation and other various physics issues would have been commonplace in Trek. Now, we do need to make a few assumptions in order to proceed. And the main question is exactly how much damage would be caused by the impact of a ship at impulse speeds when colliding with a large object like a Borg cube. This type of impact would likely have the fighter tunnel into the cube, doing massive damage as it decelerates and transfers energy to the cube. Based on what I could ascertain from canon sources and projectile impact studies, I would estimate that a single fighter would leave an impact crater on the cube roughly 3 times the size of the fighter itself, and tunnel probably as much as half a kilometer into the cube. This is, of course, assuming that the cube does not destroy the ship prior to impact, which, of course, we know the cube is quite capable of doing, as, well, an Excelsior-class starship is somewhat larger than a Jem'Hadar fighter, and we can see how easily the Borg dispatched that. Next up is a simple problem of mass. And, well, let's look at the available information for both ships. First of all, we know that a Borg cube is 3 kilometers squared. In other words, 3,000 by 3,000 by 3,000 meters, which is a total volume of 27 billion cubic meters of, well, Borg stuff. While a Jem'Hadar fighter, the most common ship in the Dominion fleet, is roughly 90 meters by 90 meters by 20 meters, or roughly 162,000 cubic meters of, well, Dominion stuff. Now, we don't know exactly what a Borg cube or a Jem'Hadar fighter are made of, but in the interest of fair play, we'll assume that they're made of roughly the same material. So if we give the Jem'Hadar the benefit of the doubt here, and they tunnel into the cube, leaving a total devastation and a path of 3 times the size of the ship, a half a kilometer into the cube with each impact, that means every impact would do about 270 meters by 60 meters by 500 meters of damage, completely destroying swaths of the cube as it impacts. Each impact would destroy roughly 8.1 million cubic meters of the cube. We also know that based on what we saw in Best of Both Worlds, the Federation calculated that a Borg cube would still be fully functional in combat with up to 78% of it destroyed. Now, 78% of a typical Borg cube would be 21,060,000,000 cubic meters, which would means that it would take 2,600 direct impacts from Jem'Hadar fighters, and that's twice the size of the fleet that Starfleet engaged in the episode Sacrifice of Angels. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. No doubt you're thinking, yeah, sure, but you're just talking about fighters. What about the big battle cruisers and battleships? And that is a fair point, but the Dominion, if the Dominion started ramming the Borg with their large ships, it would no doubt do more damage and stop the cubes a whole lot faster. But let's be real about it. The bulk of the Dominion fleet is, in fact, fighters. And keep in mind that while we call these ships fighters, they are roughly 1/3 the size of a Constitution-class starships. These are not X-Wing fighters here. Also keep in mind that while the Borg have a lot of ships outside of cubes out there, the cube is their mainstay vessel. They have thousands of cubes to spare. And if it even took just 1/10 as much of effort as I describe here to take them down, the Borg would still win based on sheer weight of numbers. So what we know is that a Borg cube is about 166,000 times the mass of a Jem'Hadar fighter. And even if Borg technology was not vastly superior to the Dominion, even if the Borg did not have the ability to adapt to weapons, even if the Borg ships could not heal themselves through pure force of will, well, resistance would still be futile.
The preceding documentary was created for the express purpose of criticism, commentary, and education, and is therefore protected under the Copyright Act of 1976, Section 107, which reads in part, the fair use of a copyrighted work, including such use by reproduction in copies or phonorecords, or by any other means specified by that section, for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright.